Yud Aleph Mishnah Vov. Hazoyrek. Someone throws an item, v'nizkar la'achar sheyotza miyodei, and he reminded himself after the item had already left his hand that it was Shabbos, and he shouldn't be throwing things on Shabbos. There's an Issa Hotzah on Shabbos. In this situation, and in the other situations that the Mishnah is going to discuss, he's going to be potter. Why? Because the rule of the Mishnah is that in order to be chayav a chatos on Shabbos, i.e. to do a melacha b'shogeg on Shabbos, the beginning and the end of the melacha has to be b'shogeg. But in our situation, the guy threw it b'shogeg, the tchila was b'shogeg, but since he reminded himself before the conclusion of the melacha, i.e. before the hanocha, the resting of this item, he reminded himself it was Shabbos, the akira was, the zrika was b'shogeg, but the hanocha, the conclusion was not b'shogeg, and therefore he's going to be potter, he's not going to be chayav v'chatos. Alternatively, kol ta'acher, if he threw the item, and then some person intercepted it and caught it, then again he's going to be potter from a chatos. Why? Because it's a case of shnaim shasuha. And we've learned previously that in order to be over a melacha on Shabbos, you have to do the whole thing yourself. In a case of shnaim shasuha, when two people do the melacha, then that is already a patur. Alternatively, klol kelev, if you threw the item, b'shogeg, and then a dog jumped up and intercepted it, and therefore that hanocha is deficient because it didn't land in a place of dalad al dalad tfachim, you didn't intend for the dog to catch it, and therefore it's considered a deficient hanocha, again you're potter. Or you throw an item, and then in midair it sort of caught a light and diminishes, there was no hanocha, and therefore in all of those situations you're potter. Zorak la'asos chabura. If a person threw a stone or an item with the intention to inflict an injury, a chabura, a wound, bein bod bein behema, whether on a human being or whether on an animal, and that is an issa of chovel, which Mr. Shem will learn in Perek Yud Dalet, the first Mishnah. That is an issa of chovel on Shabbos. V'nizkar shelo nasa chabura, and after you threw the item, but before it actually hit the person or the being and inflicted the damage, you remember that it was Shabbos, then you're potter. Again, because the beginning and the end has to be b'shogeg. And that's what the Mishnah concludes. Zeh haklal, this is the general rule. Kol chay v'chatos, ul chayo v'chatos, einan chayovin ad shetetchilosan v'sofen b'shogeg, v'shgoga. They're only going to be chay v'chatos if the beginning and the end was done b'shogeg. The Bar Tanura says, whenever you have a zeh haklal, it comes to include something. So what does it come to include? Says the Bar Tanura, zeh haklal, li'isuye nami, to include ma'avir chayfetz imakum l'makum. Not just throwing something, but even if you're just carrying an item from one place to another, she'im okar b'shgoga, if you do the akira, the initial lifting was done b'shgoga, v'nizkar, and then in mid-carrying you remember that it was Shabbos, v'nizkar shel Shabbos, before you place it down, you're potter. So it includes even that as well. And the Mishnah therefore just concludes, like I just said, and if however the beginning of the act was done b'shogeg, but the end was done b'mezid, or conversely, and the beginning was done b'mezid, but the end was done b'shogeg, then Peturin, until the beginning and the end of the act was done. The repetition of the last phrase of Perek of the Mishnah, of the end of the Perek, says the Tosfos Yontif of the Tiferes Yisrael, it comes to teach me the following chiddush: that if I were to throw an item and it would have been thrown with an initial unawareness, not being aware of the prohibition of Hutzah, therefore it's Shogeg. It started off life b'Shogeg, and then it went 2 Amos. And then all of a sudden I remembered that this is Osa, and then it went a further 2 Amos, and then again I forget that this is Osa, I become unaware of this prohibition, and then it traveled 2 Amos and then it stopped. In that situation you'd be Chayev. Why? Because initially I was b'shogeg, and at the end I was b'shogeg, and since cumulatively it traveled 4 Amos, the first 2 Amos, and then the last 2 Amos, it traveled when I was in a state of shogeg, it fulfills the criteria of Achatei Tchiloson V'Sofon Shgogo, and I would be Chai V'Chatos, even though there was a period of the middle two Amos where I was aware that this was a prohibition. Nonetheless, I would be Chai V'Chatos. That's the Chiddush of the last few words of the Mishnah. And that is the end of Perek Yud Aleph, and the final Mishnah, Mishnah Vov. That is the end of Perek Yud Aleph.